Hi, I'm Phil Constantine, and this is Travels with Phil. And on today's trip, we're going to be going to see Helen Keller's home. Helen Keller was a real inspiration to the world. She was born on June 27th in 1880 in Tuscumbia, Alabama. This is her family home. It's called Ivy Green. And when she was 19 months old, she contracted an unknown illness, which the doctors described as an acute congestion of the stomach and the brain, and which some people thought might have been scarlet fever or meningitis. And the illness unfortunately left her both deaf and blind. Now, on her own, she developed more than 60 gestures in order to communicate, and seeking other ways to improve her condition, her father took her to several people, including Alexander Graham Bell, who was working with deaf children at the time. Eventually, they went to the Perkins Institute, where Anne Sullivan became her instructor, eventual governess, and companion.
It was at this well that Anne Sullivan Macy revealed the mysteries of language to 7-year-old Helen Keller by spelling the word W-A-T-E-R into her hands as water flowed over the other hand. So this is the actual water fountain or pump. This is in Alabama.
And her method to help her communicate was that she was just using hand gestures, but she would do these into Helen's hand, and then she would try to spell out words. Now, Helen had a real hard time understanding this concept, even though she had like 60 gestures of her own. But eventually, when she was there at that hand pump, she finally got the concept. Now, these are some of her own personal writings, her printing. She eventually went on to graduate from Radcliffe College, becoming the first person who was both blind and deaf to get a Bachelor of Arts. She became an author of 12 books, a widely sought-after lecturer, and indeed an inspiration for many. There's been several movies made about her, plays made about her. The most common one that you may have seen or heard of is called The Miracle Worker. And indeed, just consider the concept of not being able to see or hear, and yet be able to eventually learn how to communicate. Now, in her case, because she was able to see and hear as a very small child, it wasn't a totally unusual, abstract concept to her. But it took a long time for it to sink in, especially since she was such a small child. But this is Anne Sullivan.
Travels with Phil continues in the National Cathedral. This is St. Joseph's Chapel, directly underneath the crossing in the crypt. And these are the 4 main pillars that hold it up. Now, several people are interred here. As you saw earlier, Woodrow Wilson. And here, I'll move up closer so you can see it. Helen Keller and her lifelong companions, Anne Sullivan Macy, are interred in the columbarium behind this chapel, and it's also there in Braille. So that's also here in St. Joseph's Chapel in the crypt of the National Cathedral, or the Cathedral of St. James and St. Paul, St. Peter and St. Paul.
Thank you very much for watching and listening to this. You can leave comments below as long as the language is family friendly. And if you haven't subscribed, just click on the button over to the right-hand side. Again, thanks for watching and listening.